those who may have joined us over the break. Otherwise, hello everyone who's been with us all morning here. And again, apologies for any repetitions, but we do want to make sure everyone gets a little bit of background if they're joining us newly. So you are joining a webinar on rule development for our state implementation plan submission requirements for a moderate non-attainment of the 2015 Ozone National Ambient Air Quality Standard. This is the Clark County Department of Environment and Sustainability's Division of Air Quality. I'm Jody Bechtel. I'm the Deputy Director of the department. Again, just a really quick background before we get into the rule that we're going to be talking about. So the Division of Air Quality, or DAQ, as you'll hear us refer to ourselves as, we serve as the Air Pollution Control Agency for Clark County, Nevada. On this screen just shows you some of the contacts working on this ozone attainment SIP. And in January of this year, we had a series of public meetings, but in January and February, but in January, we had a meeting and kind of discussed the background of the situation we're in. In summary, we were in marginal non-attainment of the ozone standard when it was 0.075 parts per million. And once it was lowered to 0.070 parts per million, we have been bumped up to moderate non-attainment. It requires that we develop an attainment plan and identify actions that will get us back into attainment and reduce our emissions. And again, I encourage you to go back to our website and look at or review the presentations that were previously recorded in January and February for, again, more detailed information. But for this presentation, again, we're talking about several of the rules that we're looking to promulgate. The ozone attainment situation is for the Las Vegas Valley, formerly the Hydrographic Area 212, or HA 212, as we'll refer to it. And that is what the area in which, again, that's being impacted by the ozone attainment situation. Also want to point out the last bullet on this slide that the EPA is reviewing the ozone standard, and it could be lowered again, in which case we might be facing a serious non-attainment ozone situation if we don't get into attainment before then. So for the ozone attainment plan that we're developing, we are required to review reasonably available control technology, or RACT, requirements on our area sources and see if there are, again, additional controls that we could implement to help get into attainment. We are required to provide a 15% rate of progress, reducing volatile organic compounds by 15% independent of any reductions necessary for attainment. And we are required to come up with contingency measures that would be triggered if we do not reach the attainment of 70 parts per million by August of 2024. And this table just outlines the various rules that we are looking to promulgate or considering promulgating to get us to that attainment. So this table identifies the statutory timelines we're working under. So on the 5th of January of this year, we were notified that we were going to be bumped up to moderate attainment and that our state implementation plan would be due on the 1st of January. And yes, that is a retroactive deadline. Thus creating this kind of crunch that we're under to try and get these actions in place as soon as possible. And I did mention, yes, our sorry, something in my way here, that, yeah, so some of the other deadlines that we're under, but we are, the main deadline being the August of 2024 to reach attainment. So we need to get these additional measures in place as soon as possible. If we do not get our SIP submitted and some of these actions in place, EPA could start a sanction clock, which could lead to a loss of our federal highway funds for Clark County and potentially other penalties, including allowing EPA to impose a federal implementation plan and implement control requirements on our community. So these are the current groups of stakeholder workshops that we are holding. We are on the industrial adhesives workshop. We've got additional workshops planned for the 13th and additional ones coming in the future, a date to be determined. I'll post this link in the chat room where you can watch any of the previous workshops and these workshops once they are final and posted. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lynn Hutchinson, who is a principal project manager and counsel for RTP. Lynn, take it away.
All righty. Let me know when you guys can see my screen.
We're good.
Okay, great. So as Jody said, we are here today to talk to you about the Industrial Adhesives Control Techniques Guideline document and associated RACT requirements. EPA issued the CTG for industrial adhesives back in 2008. And just in case y'all just want a little bit of trivia, this number right here, 08, represents the year that EPA issues a document, and this number is the number of documents issued in that year. So this particular document was the 5th document that EPA issued in 2008. Just a little bit of trivia on EPA document numbering system. Okay, just as the name implies, industrial adhesives are compounds that join two surfaces together into a bond. The rule would not address a category of adhesives known as sealants, which are regulated in some states under their CTG RACT rules. This was done as the suggestion of a model rule that the Ozone Transport Commission put out, or OTC as it's called for short. We just want to make clear that this rule follows only the recommendations that EPA put out in its CTG for adhesives and adhesive primers and not for sealants. And it would apply to a variety of manufacturing and repair facilities. So if you are conducting automotive repairs and you use adhesives in that operation, this could apply to you, as well as any industrial or manufacturing operation, unless it's otherwise exempt. The application methods for using adhesive materials are very similar to those used for coatings. I've included a list of the ways in which the materials are applied. And like many of the other categories that we're talking about today, the main source of emissions is through evaporation. I wanted to note that Clark County already has a solvent rule that could be read to apply to adhesives. This rule applies as a matter of federal law because it was approved years and years ago into the Nevada State Implementation Plan. This rule, however, was withdrawn by DAQ from Clark County's air quality rules back in 2011, so it has not been actively enforced since that time, although EPA has the ability to force it at the federal level. As part of the SIP submission package, or the state implementation plan that DAQ would submit, DAQ would be asking that EPA withdraw this rule from the SIP and replace it with the suite of rules, the CTG rules that we're going over today. And relative to this one would be both the industrial solvent cleaning rule and the industrial adhesives rule. Clark County's rule would apply to industrial adhesive operations at a stationary source if the emissions from those operations exceeds 3 tons per year on a potential to emit basis, and that's 3 tons of volatile organic compounds, or VOC. It would apply in any area that the US EPA designates as non-attainment for an ozone standard if it also classifies that area as moderate or higher in classification. So right now, it would apply, when finalized, to geographic area 212. But in the future, if EPA were to revise the standard and set a new level and implement new designations that was larger in scope from a geographic standpoint than HA 212, this rule is set up to also apply in that area. The rule applies some partial exemptions from the requirements in the rule. If you are subject to a RACT rule under another air quality standard, if you are subject to US EPA rules under Part 60, 61, or 63 that are established after September, I believe it should be 2008 on this screen instead of 2006. Sorry about that, folks. Because that's the when the CTG was issued. Let me see if I can change that real quick. I wonder if it automatically updates. Oh, it does. Yay. So 2008, or if you're subject to a Part 59 standard. It would also exempt research and development activities, quality assurance, and things conducted at an analytical laboratory, tire repair operations, medical equipment manufacturing, and fiberglass parts assembly or fiberglass boat manufacturing. Not a lot of that going on in Clark County, but you know, with climate change, who knows? Maybe you'll actually have lakes and rivers in the future that are full of water. There would also be a partial exemption for cyanoacrylic adhesives or adhesive primers that are sold or supplied in net volume of less than or equal to 16 ounces. But an exception to this exemption would be for cement welding adhesives and contact adhesives. There's a separate exemption for contact adhesives that are sold or supplied with a net weight of less than or equal to 1 gallon. Folks falling under these exemption criteria would just need to keep records documenting their eligibility for the exemption and make those records available should an inspector come to the site and request them. Additional partial exemptions would apply if your facility emits less than 3 tons per year of VOC from industrial adhesive operations over the past 3 consecutive years. You would be exempt from the standard, but you would need to submit for the registration requirement, which we'll go over later. You'd need to track your use and comply with the work practice requirements in the rule. Additionally, you'd need to keep records on site and update the registration yearly. The owner and operator of an industrial adhesive operations at a stationary source that are not otherwise exempt would need to comply with the emission reduction and work practice requirements in the rule. The rule provides 3 options for assuring emission reductions under the rule. The first is that you can limit your VOC content of your industrial adhesives. And I would refer you to the draft rule for the specific limits and types of applications because it varies by the type and application. So please take a look at the draft rule that's posted on the website for all of the specific VOC limit content limits. You would have to use a VOC emission, or another option is use a VOC emission control system that achieves an 85% emission reduction by weight. And finally, you could opt for a combination of using VOC content limits and emission control systems that achieves an equivalent level, or that 85% emission reduction by weight on a monthly basis. So you could average what you use over the course of a month to show that you're achieving the 85% emission reduction by weight. In addition, you'd have to use efficient application methods if you are not using the emission control system option. Those methods are listed here. Work practice requirements, these are similar to what we have seen if you've been on the line since the beginning of this workshop. These are very similar to what would be applied to other industries. You need to label your containers that are larger than 1 gallon with the name of the product in the container. You would need to use closed, non-absorbent, non-leaking containers or handheld spray bottles without propellant force. You would need to prevent splashing and atomizing solvents, minimize air circulation around the operations, promptly repair leaks and immediately contain and clean up spills, cover containers when they're not in use, and convey solvent and waste in closed and labeled systems. Finally, we would ask owners and operators to put an inspection program into place to walk around the work site, make sure that there's covers and lids on things that need to be covered, and to conduct this inspection at least quarterly and provide new employees with training and annually update and annually retrain your operators to make sure that these work practices are followed. I mentioned that there's a registration requirement. This would apply to any source with a PTE over equal to or greater than 3 tons per year of VOC. No later than 180 days after the rule becomes effective, you would need to submit a registration. And the registration is just going to have basic information on it. Who's the owner and operator? Where's your stationary source located? What's your PTE? What's your actual emissions? And then we would ask that you update this registration annually with any information that changes. For compliance dates, we've got different dates for existing sources versus new sources. Existing sources would have 180 days to come into compliance with the rule. Unless you were to begin construction before the start of the rule, you would have until you commence normal operations to comply. Or if subsequently after the standard becomes effective, you become subject to the rule, you need to comply with the rule right away. New sources, you need to comply upon commencing normal operations. There are some exceptions to these general compliance deadlines. There is a sell-through provision that would be provided in the rule that basically says after the effective date of the rule, you cannot purchase non-compliant material unless you're using an emission control system to control emissions from use of that material. But if you have material already in your existing inventory, you can continue to use that material without complying with the standards for up to 1 year after the effective date of the rule. This is only for existing sources. This doesn't apply to new sources. Finally, there's an additional exception to the compliance deadlines. We realize that these rules are being done on a fast track, and DAQ may not know all the circumstances that an individual stationary source faces in trying to come into compliance with a rule. So if you have justification that you cannot meet the deadline of 180 days, you may submit a permit application requesting an alternative compliance date. You would need to submit with that request your proposed compliance date and the reasons why this is the fastest that you can meet the rules requirements. That proposed deadline would apply to you until DAQ acts on your request by either approving it and issuing a permit with the alternative compliance date or denying your request. And with that, we're at the end of the rule, and I will turn it back over to Araceli.
Thank you, Lynn. Now, I want to give everybody the opportunity to ask any questions. You feel free to raise your hand and I can enable your microphone or post your question in the chat. I will, let me see. Who's this? Rhett, I'll get to the timeline for this rulemaking effort in just a moment. But if anybody has any questions related to what Lynn has presented, please go ahead and raise your hand or post that in the chat. Gary, let me go ahead and enable your microphone. Okay, you should be able to speak now. If you're speaking, we can't hear you yet.
He is unmuted. Oh, no, now he's muted again.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me. Gary, can you?
How about
Oh,
now? Can you hear me now?
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I clicked the button and then it like disappeared. So now the mic's back. So just a quick question on the exemptions. We had identified that certain graphic art sources should not be covered by the adhesive rule. Was that identified in the exemptions, or do I need to look in the language for that?
So what we have in here is that if your operation is complying with another CTG RAT rule, then you would not need to comply with this rule. So if you have the graphic arts rule and we will have a CTG for graphic arts. And if your industrial adhesive operation falls under that standard, then you would not need to comply with this standard. But if there's no other CTG or emission rule under 60, 61, 63, or 59 that apply, then you will need to comply with this rule.
Okay, but we have sources in graphic arts that aren't covered by the CTG though.
Okay. So right now, we do not have that exemption in the draft rule. So if you think we've missed something, please send that on in.
Okay, no problem.
I mean, we got the cyano acrylic adhesives. Yeah, no, I'm not seeing it on my list of exemptions. So if we've missed something, please let us know.
Okay, great.
And Gary, you're saying that was in it's either in other state rules or it's an EPA CTG?
Yeah, well, submitted comments after the first round of workshops that we had along those lines.
Oh, so we actually did not, in the first round, we did not address industrial adhesives because at that time we had not identified any sources in the category. So that we wouldn't have gotten that. You probably submitted on the industrial solvents rule,
Yeah.
but yeah, the industrial adhesives new is brand new because after we did that series of workshops, we happened to come across a facility and realized we needed to do the CTG RAT.
Okay, all right. Okay, great.
And if you can just let us know the state or where the exemption comes from so that we have that in our document, I'm sure we can likely add that to the rule.
Okay, will do.
Thank you, Gary. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing anything. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and talk about the rulemaking timeline and next steps. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. So again, this is a timeline that we're working with. Today's the workshop day, and then we would start public comment on September 3rd, ending on October 3rd, followed by adoption, public hearing, and adoption by the Board of County Commissioners on November 21st. The rule would become effective 2 weeks later on December 5th. And the compliance dates that Lynn talked about in her presentation are specific to each rule and are based on this rule effective date of December 5th. So the next steps, We will consider comments received today and any additional written comments we received by July 27th. You can send those comments to me at the email address provided. This is your opportunity to give your input to help us get this rule right before we release it to the public for comment on September 3rd. So we highly encourage you to get us comments as soon as possible and no later than July 27th. Again, the proposed rule would be released for the 30-day public notice, followed by a final adoption at a public hearing by the Board of County Commissioners. Those who have registered for our mailing list will receive updates on the developments of these rules as well as our attainment plan. You can also follow the development of our rulemaking effort as well as our attainment plan using the above link. And again, you can view the draft rules on our webpage. These workshop presentations and recordings will also be posted on our webpage in the next day or two. And I've posted these links in the chat. And in closing, we just want to let you know that we'll continue to engage the industry and public in the development of our rules and the attainment SIP. Any questions can be directed to the contacts on this slide. And again, if you wish to receive notices on plan development and have not already done so, please sign up for our distribution list. That's all I have. Does anyone else have anything before we close this session?
So Rhett posted another question.
Oh, let me see what. Okay, Rhett is asking, so for this specific rule, the planned compliance date would be 180 days from December 5th. Lynn, do you want to go ahead and address that?
Yeah, so it's whenever these rules finally go final, which right now is scheduled for December. If things take longer, then you're going to have 180 days from whatever day the rule gets approved by the board.
You're muted, Araceli.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and close this session. I'm not seeing any further questions or comments. We have another session starting at 10:40, and that is for the miscellaneous metal and plastic parts. So we will see anybody who's interested in that session in 7 minutes back here in the same place. Thank you all for your time today.